to the In the Sweetgrass with Misty Flowers. In the Sweetgrass is a video podcast that was created as a way to document and share our culture at a wider level. Misty Flowers is the executive director of NCWIC. She is a member of the Santee Sioux Nation of Nebraska and is a descendant of the Tlingit of Alaska and Ho-Chunk.
Featuring special guest Rita Hart.
So I want to say ampetu washte chante washte na pechu zapi ampo mini boja de mie washichu ia Misty Thomas Flowers and makapie. So I'm Misty Flowers. My Dakota name is Ampo Mini Boja, and we are here with Miss Rita Hart. This March is Women's History Month, and so we are going to be talking about women's history from an Indigenous lens and Indigenous perspective. And I'm super excited to have Miss Rita Hart with me today. Rita, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Halito, Jehochafo at Rita Hart, Chatasia, Hickory Apachesia, Akinkalia, Toxalia, Ikatananchi, Oklahoma, Imata, Himata, Nitak, Chiapama, Likat, Sanayopa, Pianatia, Hoba, Tush, Alaka, Chuma. And so what I was saying is greetings. It's a good day. I'm glad to be here with you. I am Rita Hart. I am Choctaw, and I am also Hickory Apache. And I work as a trainer, and also I teach people. My home is in Oklahoma, and I'm just happy or glad to be here with you, Misty, and just being able to have this conversation with you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rita. I appreciate you sharing your time and energy with us today. And like I said, March is Women's History Month. And so when I think about women's history from the Indigenous perspective, and you get on and you can, Google, women's history, and there's a lot of women's activists, politicians, business leaders, and over the years, and unfortunately there's not a lot of Native women that are recognized in that in that history. And I mean, and then just saying that word history, I was just thinking too, how how biased even language is. So we could maybe even say her story, and so looking back, are there any women that come to mind, or what is some of that history that you what comes to mind for you when we talk about women's history from that Indigenous lens?
Well, I guess for me, it goes back, I think about my grandmother, my Hickory grandmother. She didn't speak any English, and she was one of those that she didn't, she wasn't forced to go to boarding school because her parents had hid her. She was only 3 when they were taking all the children, and I think that's what helped her maintain. She kept her native language, all of her her beliefs and ceremonies and values, knowledge. Everything that she had, and we used to spend every summer with her. We would go out and stay, and she lived in a little cabin out in the reservation, and there was no running water, no electricity, and even back then, my uncle was there, and my grandfather, and then our parents, and then us siblings. I have 4 sisters and a brother. So all of us were staying in this one room. We would go out and stay. We'd all sleep together, and you don't see that anymore. And so anyway, I was thinking about her role. She was the matriarch. She made all the decisions. She was the one that cooked. She cooked. She fed us. She had goats and sheep, and so we would help her tend to those things. And she was teaching us, even though we had a language barrier. And it was always, she was always good. She would speak to us. Sometimes I would pick up words here and there. And so I always think about her and her role and how things have evolved over time. And then my mother, she ended up going to boarding school, and she finished. She went to Santa Fe Indian Boarding School, and then came to Oklahoma. And she got her nursing certificate during that time. And then it wasn't too long after that she married my dad, who was Choctaw. And so that's how they got together and made their home here. And so since the two were different tribes, they didn't teach us the language. It's unfortunate. And I think a lot of people are that way. We don't have our language. And so when I was introducing myself, that's in the Choctaw language. It's easier to pronounce. Know some of the Hickory, but it's a lot more difficult, at least for me. And so as I think over time, she was the one that encouraged me. Even my dad, they both said, you need to get an education. You've got to get, if you want a voice in this world, if you want to be able to be someone, you have to have that education. And of course, when I was a teenager, I didn't know any better. They were telling me this. And so I didn't even finish high school. And, and I got married not long after that and started a family. And it was a woman that I think, well, what had happened? I went to work for this, she was a Chickasaw lady, and she was older, and she was one of my first mentors. And so she talked to me time and time again about who I am. She said, you're a woman, you're raising your family. And she said, you need to go back to school. Your parents have been telling you that. And, I resisted it at first. And then after a while, I said, well, okay, I'll take a class. So I just took one class. And then after I got into college, I found out that I could actually do this. Because of historical trauma, we have people that tell you that you're not smart enough. You're not going to make it. You're an Indian woman. How are you going to make it in that college? Which was majority of them were white. And so that was a challenge in itself. But I stuck, I stuck to it for it took me about 5 years because I had a family, I had to support my family. I had to work. And I even quit at one time. And there was a Native American female. She was a counselor at the school, and she wasn't very encouraging. And, I think back to that conversation we had that day, because I was telling her, I said, I'm stressed. I can't do this. I'm going to quit. I don't have a babysitter. I mean, just the life challenges. And she wasn't even encouraging. She just said, well, you're just like anybody else. We get these Indians in here and nobody wants to learn. And I, and I just felt so defeated. I thought, what are you saying? I said, I was hoping she would help me try to lift me up so I can get out of this slump. And so I ended up quitting. And then about a year later, I went back and finally was able to finish. And that was just a 2-year degree, and that's when I thought, oh, I'm done. I did this, go on, do something else. So I went back, started a full-time employment. And the more I worked, then I had someone else, another mentor that came in, and she was telling me, you need to go back to college. You are so smart. You have that ability to understand things that some people don't have that gift. And so she was so encouraging. So I went back and got my bachelor's degree. And that too took me a little bit of time too, because again, still had a family and still working part-time. And I had decided to get my social work degree. And that really enlightened me. I didn't realize how much that I wanted to help other people. And so I ended up with my degree in social work, and then thought I was done. And that's when I went to work for my tribe. I went to work for the Choctaw Nation, and I really didn't even know what child welfare was, and that's some people were kind of surprised at that. They said, well, you grew up in a home that had, we had alcoholism, there was some domestic violence and some poverty. And so they said, well, you should have, why weren't you investigated? Like, your children, your family would have been, exposed to that. And I said, no, I had no clue. And so when I went to work for the Choctaw Nation Indian Child Welfare, and then I had other mentors there, and they were just wonderful. I mean, they were older Choctaw women, and one of them spoke her language, and she would encourage me, about learning the language. She said, you need to learn where you come from. And so I learned, a lot there, and ended up working for them for about 3 years. And this was when Indian Child Welfare was pretty new. This was in the early 90s. And so they were just awarding all of these programs. And so we were a very small program. There was only 3 of us that covered the whole southeast part of Oklahoma. And so we were working with all these families, and it was, it was a huge learning experience for me. And I ended up going to work for the state. And the only reason is because I knew enough about ICWA at that point that I didn't have a voice from the tribe. And there was so much advocacy I wanted to do for the tribe and for the families that I wasn't able to. So I ended up going to work for the state. and could advocate from that side, because the tribe didn't have tribal court, as we do now. People can assume jurisdiction, and that was always that leverage. We didn't have that back then. So I went to work for the state and was there for, gosh, almost all my whole life, it seems. But and I worked from all the way from the bottom on up, from investigations to, I did adoptions, foster care. I worked in a big county, small county. Then I went into supervision, then I went to administrative work, and then ended up at state office. And that was kind of the end of my journey, because I realized then that, and that was my point of going to the state level, was to advocate and write policy. And I was working for tribal programs, or a liaison for the tribes. And I really enjoyed working with the tribes, but I knew that, at that point, there wasn't a lot of support. And so I ended up leaving the state, but they were taking early retirement. And so then went to BIA for a couple of years, and then worked at OU, and then I went to National Capacity Center for Tribes. And then it's been, I keep telling people I want to retire. I'm tired. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And they said, well, why do you keep going? And I said, because I think there's just so much work, but it's such an exciting time. Now with ICWA, all of the, even with the, we were able to overcome the Supreme Court, with the decision that was passed last year. And that was just so enlightening to know that we still, we still hold strong. And so as I think about, Indigenous, women, I'm always encouraging other women. To me, that's my, I want to give this to them. I want to give back to what I was taught, how I was encouraged to be, a strong woman. And then, as I think we were talking earlier about seeing these women that are, they're highly educated, they're very articulate, they're so empowering. And I just pray for them. When I pray, I thought, oh, they're doing such good work. And, just thank Creator for putting them to where they are. And even for you, Misty, I followed you with NICWIC, and I just see so much good work. And I thought, oh my gosh, we need more of this, if we can spread this in the different locations. And so, as you were asking, who was it initially? I mean, there were just so many of them, I can see their faces and see, still hear some of those messages. You carry those with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. You have touched on so many important things. And I also wanted to mention that March is National Social Work Month.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it is so fitting that you are joining us this month, and, you can talk about, both. And you also talked about historical trauma, and thank you so much for sharing about your grandma. And, I'm the same way. And I was sitting here as I was listening to you, I was thinking about, my grandma, and all the, I don't know, she's like really been on my mind, and I don't know why. Most recently, she's been gone, for quite a few years, since I was 17. And, but in that short time, that I had with her, and I say short time because 17 years is definitely not long enough, and even that, you can talk about how, historical trauma affects, the our lifespan, the longevity of how long we live. Right. And, and there's been many women that have impacted me in my life. And there is so much of that, definitely wouldn't be who I am today without having them in my life. So I appreciate you sharing about your grandma. But you had also talked about historical trauma, and, how that, so I think, historical trauma has impacted women, especially. I mean, it impacts everybody, but, the impact that it has on women, and like you said, as, even within your own life, having to, like, raise your family while going to school, while working, like doing all the things like I did the same thing. And, it was so tiring, and I'm just like, oh man, I've thought about going back to school, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do that again. That was so exhausting, but so worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Education is so worth it. So there's just a couple of things there that you had talked about that I definitely resonate with. And like you said, with the exciting times of right now, with his ICWA, and thinking, listening to you talk, all of that history that you have even within the Indian child welfare arena, and all of the work that you've done and how important that is. And now, so thinking about how it was a long time ago, because my mom was a social worker back in the day, back in like in the 80s. And I remember her sitting in her office, and she'd be sitting there smoking her cigarettes and working, and in the tribal building. And there were some things that she said to me that has always stuck with me, in terms of like, Indian child welfare and foster care. And she would always say, kids will always want to find their way home. And, now as I understand that as a professional, what that means, because at the time I was like, what, kids are going to find, going to find their way home. But, meaning their tribe, their family, their biological family, their, those roots. And so, just some of my thoughts on what you were saying, and that evolvement of foster care throughout the years, and what this profession looks like, and all the changes that it's seen over the years.
Right. Yeah. And I think as you talk about, the historical trauma, and I think that's where when we talk about anything that has to do with the Indian Child Welfare Act, or even just working with Indian families, is understanding that dynamic. All of us have experienced it in one way or other. It's still very real. I still see a lot of we have so many families that are struggling with addictions, and they're self-medicating, and we know all of that's just symptoms of that trauma that's, hasn't ever been resolved. And, I think that's where we move forward, is to understanding our role, even as, and you mentioned the terminology of foster care, and I tried to impress upon others that are working in those programs, is to change that narrative. It's not foster care. This is caregiving. This is where we as Indian people should be. We should be taking care of our own. And we need to be educating our communities on why it's so important. I know that they see and they hear from the media, that, child welfare or any foster care is all negative. And that's not who we are as Indian people. Indigenous communities should be embracing our children. And, when you say that, we use that terminology, children are our future. But do they really understand that? Because of course, we talked about the generational trauma. They don't have that, they're experiencing a lot of trauma themselves. And so it is a healing process. We all have to heal our communities so that we can start embracing who we are, as who we used to be, embracing some of those cultural values, some of those beliefs, bringing all that to the forefront. Because as you said, that root system, it's still there, and we still all have that grounding in our roots, but how do we identify them, and how do we understand, what that is and what it means, and just bringing our people together. And so I think that's a lot of it. Again, that's one of the things I've, tried to, in some of the training that I do now, I talk about some of those stories, and even my own personal history, but then I tell, I try to use a lot of stories on how we can start this healing process, and embracing their communities, and having some of these difficult conversations, because it is hard to talk about, and some people don't want to hear it either. So you have to overcome some of that too.
Right. Yeah. So like when I talk about historical trauma and do training on historical trauma, I always talk about how, like we, us and our generation, we are trying to heal from historical trauma without passing it on to our children and the next generations. But yet, like, we still live in it, and we also work in it. And, I mean, child welfare, I look at as like, we're treating the symptoms of historical trauma through, child welfare and all the other various systems out there, right? Like the, criminal justice system, the prison systems, mental
Right.
health, substance abuse, I mean, even healthcare. but we definitely feel it within within the child welfare system. And just, I mean, I can think of family after family after family, that it's just like it's trauma after trauma after trauma. And how do we help them? How do we advocate for them? How do we empower them to advocate for themselves? And I mean, there's just so much, but yeah, historical trauma, I mean, people think that it was so long ago, like that, all of that stuff happened so long ago that, but not really realizing that some of it is still happening, because that's historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, like that's what it is. Like it keeps happening, it keeps happening.
Right.
So
Well, even when you're talking, and that's what I hear too, they say, oh, that was so long ago. Because we do, we use some of those historical events. We talk about like removal, for Oklahoma, we had all of our tribes that were removed and relocated here. And then, all the different government acts that had occurred, with the allotment, the Dawes Roll. I mean, all of those things were part of that history. But then what we do, we bring it forward and we just talk about now what's, as you think about even like boarding schools, but think about foster care. Foster care is just another boarding school experience. I mean, it's still we don't have enough ICWA homes. And so these children are being removed, not only from their families, but their communities, and they're being placed all over. That's a huge issue in Oklahoma. They're placed all over the state in non-ICWA homes, non-Indian, non-tribal homes. And because the tribes are so limited on the homes that they have available, and the families, the kin, the relatives that they have in their communities aren't taking those children in. And so it's re-traumatizing, it's that perpetuating that trauma for these children. And with the separation, the loss, the grief, I mean, it's just another generation. And so, that's one of the things that we continually stress, to our communities. And I come across, those women, that are those strong advocates. And, I just encourage them. I say, you're doing good work. You may not see that because you're so involved, you're so involved in this whole, you can't see the forest for the trees because there is just so much, and you can become consumed. But I encourage them. I said, but you're making a difference. It may just be one child, but that's one child. You're moving forward. And for that child, he's going to have a lifetime, or she will have a lifetime of that healing process that you've provided for them. And so I think about my daughter. We had a conversation last week, and she's not been one that's been in the leadership role. She's always been one. She just kind of behind the scenes, and she's a hard worker. I mean, she does a lot of good things. And so she recently took the role as a coach for their stickball, the women's stickball team. And so that's another evolving of our indigenous women, especially with the Chickasaw Nation, is they've never allowed women to play. It was, traditionally it was only the men. And there was a purpose for that, because it was more of a I don't know how to explain how they, when they had their games, it was also kind of a ceremony, as they were thinking about different times of year. It was always evolved. It was around certain times of year, was the seasons were changing. And so, that's all evolved over time. And so now they're allowing the women to play. And it was initially, and this is all new for this, and it's really been neat to see it evolve here, because they had their stickball team was they brought it back, and they had the men were playing, and they gradually let the women start playing. So they're playing alongside the men. And then they said, well, the women couldn't pick up sticks, and so they weren't allowed to touch the sticks, and so they were just using their hands. And that was for the first few years. And then they finally evolved where they started, well, okay, you women could start playing with their own sticks. So they start picking them up, and then they started getting as good as the men. And so anyway, it's just kind of evolved. And so now they have their own team. And so my daughter is one of the coaches, and she's really been very encouraging to the women in this community. She's empowering them, letting them know that they especially, they said, she was talking about some of the women, they come from abusive home, they have abusive environments, and they've been so isolated. They're dependent on their male, their partner. And so they don't feel that it's appropriate for them to be separate from their male counterpart. And so she's been talking with them about, you have your own, you're a woman, you have your own mind, you have what things that you want to do. And so she's really been talking about that. And then so the men are feeling a little I don't know if the word threatened, but maybe not accepting the change that's coming, as they're seeing it. And so they're saying, well, I think we need to have, we need to think about this. The women shouldn't be going off on their own. And they're not going off on their own. They're just trying to build support from within. And so she was talking about how they're trying to be protective. And so some of the women don't even feel comfortable playing when a man is around. They may feel, maybe there's some fear, I don't know, but so they talk about that too. And they said, well, we just want this to be a safe place for the women to come. The women can have their own, because we, especially for women, we have ways that we come together as it seems like there's more cohesiveness and safety. And so that's one of the things she's promoting. And so we talked about that. And then she was talking about the challenges. She said, it's just not fair though, because all of us have children. So whenever it's time to play, we can't play if we don't have a babysitter. Even though there's dad there, when dad wants to go play, he can just say, okay, let me go. He just runs off and goes to play, but not for the women.
Yeah.
So she talks about that, she said, it's not that we're complaining, it's just a reality. And she said, I don't think that they understand that. And I said, well, you need to explain that to them. And I said, I'm not saying that you're, trying to change how things are done, but at least to get that for them to acknowledge, it is different for women. And so I thought that was just an example, of how things are changing. And it's really good to see though, and especially for my daughter, just to see her taking that lead and having those conversations with those people.
Yeah, for sure. You touched on so many important things there, and thank you for sharing that story of women's empowerment and how things are changing and evolving, and we're constantly changing and evolving over time, and and how it is different for us as women, and as the caregivers and life givers of our tribes and of our families, that's just the way it is. Like we learn how to manage so much. We've got trying to take care of ourselves. That's usually comes last though, right? Because we're taking care of our children, we're taking care of our households, our homes, our companions if we have companions, and then still try, and now, with today, we're, trying to have a life of our own, a career, a job, maybe school. There's so much to manage, but yet, like you said, I do, I see a lot of women out there as well, like out there just killing it. Like they're knocking it out and getting it done, and it's so awesome to see. And but yeah, you also have to know, like, they're probably exhausted, but that little bit of time that they get to spend with their teammates and playing, is maybe, that little bit of time that they get, that's probably their me time for the week.
Right.
And that might be, maybe just an hour or two, and that's all they get, But I was also thinking about like what you said about your daughter, and I love that, what you said about, she's helping to uplift the others, the other women, and just recognizing, like, that's a challenge that women have that men don't have a lot of times. Some men do, some, not discounting that there aren't men that are single parents, and they're doing that caregiving, but a lot of times it is the women. And
yeah, one of the things she mentioned too, she said, I hope people don't think we're men haters. She said, it has nothing to do with it.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I loved hearing you talk about your daughter too, because and that's how it is for us, and as mothers. And my daughter's in the Army, and it's a male dominated field, but I think it has changed so much over the years, that she, I'm thankful she doesn't have to go through a lot of those things that were, like, Army based, and the gender inequalities there, but she still feels it. There's just things are different. And I don't, yeah, I think you're kind of getting to at that too, like, we're not complaining about it, but just like that, it is what it is.
Right.
and recognizing that.
Right. And I think that's why it's so important that we do have those supportive networks, that we do have someone that recognizes that, that it is exhausting, but then they're willing to pick it up. What can I do to help you? What can I do to support you? And I think that's why it's, that goes back to the community again, and even families. I don't think we do enough. We've gotten so, I don't know, nuclear, I guess that's the word. It seems like people are just moving, we're moving away from each other. And we don't come together. And I go to funerals sometimes and we'll see somebody I haven't seen in years, and oh, we need to get together more. We shouldn't have to just come together for a funeral, and that's true. We shouldn't get that far away from each other, that we've lost that connection. Even though we may live in different locations, I mean, there's still now with technology, you can have a FaceTime anytime or share videos. There's all different ways that we can stay connected.
Yeah, for sure. Everything is just constantly evolving. Ways there's always so much to keep up on too.
Right.
But and so I was thinking more about what you said about like uplifting each other, and it made me think of something that one of my mentors, like because I feel like, and I'm guessing that you've probably felt this way too at times, where it felt like sometimes like we are our own, well, not just ourselves personally, but like in Indian country where we're constantly, like, if it's like constantly pulling each other down. And my I had a mentor, Philip Whiteman, and he said, he called it reservationitis. And so like that's what I call that now. It's like, some people say like that crabs in the bucket, but yet, you can hear stories of like what you were talking about with your daughter, of uplifting each other. So I kind of got stuck in that with thinking about reservationitis and how we do that to each other. And it seems like, oh no, my landline, hang on a second.
Uh,
Oh, shucks. Sorry about that. Um, our toll-free number, it rings to my home phone first and then to my cell phone. So family and a mom looking for help.
Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear
Oh, there
me?
you are. Yeah, it was froze for a minute. I think it's my internet. My connection's been unstable.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was our toll-free number rings to my landline first. Some people are like, you still have a landline? I'm like, I do. You never know when you I've actually been in a situation where our cell phones quit working. It was
Yeah.
when was flooding and it felt like the apocalypse was hitting because I'm like, cell phones weren't working. We didn't have a landline, so it's like, what do we do? Um, internet quit working. It was just craziness, but yeah, as a mom that was needing some help. So anyway, so apologize about that. Now I totally forgot what I was saying.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so
I
I was
don't know. I
talking,
had visitors come in. Go ahead.
yeah, you said you have visitors coming?
Oh, no, they came in. So I was talking to them as you were on the call.
Oh, okay.
I forgot
Okay.
what we were talking about too.
Yeah, okay, so
You were talking about reservationitis. I think that's where you got in. You were finishing up that.
yeah. So I was talking about reservationitis and like how at least, I think that that's kind of common in Indian country, just like to pull each other down or to it's like constantly having something negative to say about people and not seeing the positive and constantly thinking like the tribe owes us something, like that's all, what I was thinking about in terms of reservationitis, but that, but yet, and like I've even seen some shift, and I think especially I think I guess, and maybe it's a generalization, but it seems like a lot of especially women that are educated, that have they've gotten that education, they've got some professional background and all of that, um like seem to be more uplifting and helping each other and encouraging each other. And I was just kind of thinking about that, and so I appreciate the story that you had shared about your daughter, and I think that's a like I wish that it was like that like all the time, where women were uplifting of each other. And I just don't think it's and I try to be that way myself and encourage other women that if they're going to school or applying for a new job or all kinds of things, but that it's not cool anymore to like for us to like hold each other down, like we should be uplifting each other. So just some of the thoughts that I had about that. Oh no, and I think you're frozen. Oh no. Oh, yep, I lost her.
That's a new term. As you were talking about reservationitis, I just wanted to say that was a terminology I've not heard, but I think it's so true. I can see that, it's something I've experienced, especially living in, I used to tell people that I live in two worlds, or three actually, if you count the white world, but then the other is the Indian, the Choctaw community here, and then going back to the Hickory Apache Reservation in New Mexico. It's kind of like being civilized and uncivilized. They used to use that terminology. But when I would go back to the reservation, they were that was never accepted because I wasn't, from there for one. And then the other was that I was only half, I was half blood. Back then, most of them were full blood. And so they even gave, that judgment because you didn't have that. And then, of course, we didn't speak the language. So that was another. So we were never accepted. And so then, that was one thing that when I was talking about my grandma, being there with her, she never did she never did treat us different. You know, even when my cousins were around, we were all treated the same. And so I think that's where that's some of my grounding, my roots. When I think about that, my place there, that's still my home. And then I have my home here. And so it's different. And just growing up in that. So I can see that. And they're still, and I think about that reservation and what they've gone through. You talk about historical trauma and the boarding schools, all that's happened to them. And they say it's in our DNA. We're finding that's been researched and it's true. And so that, is carrying forth. And so just recognizing that. So as we enter those spaces, that we really need to be cognizant of even who we are, how we can uplift people, and not take that with us and just repeat that type of behavior. Because a lot of it it's just behavior, and it's so disheartening whenever you see it or you experience it. And I just hope that when some point, we were going to be able to heal, but it seems like a lot of the tribes too are restoring their cultural ways. And I think that's a step into that right direction. And so, as we try to overcome that reservationitis and healing from that and not have to feel that that's it's a reality, it should be something that we can overcome. And, I see that even with lateral violence, even our tribal leaders, you see a lot of political, that's so, they always say, well, it's politics, tribal politics. And I said, that's sad. We're still seeing that today. We have our leaders who are they're not in those positions for the right reasons. There's a lot of that, several, a lot of different things that happen, but it's so damaging within our tribal communities. And, that's areas that when I see women that are coming into those roles and they seem to have more of a healing spirit, those are the ones we should support. And we should, and of course, pray for all of them, but the women that are doing that, that's their role. That's who we were, in our traditions. We were to be that person. We're the caregivers. We're the one that's supposed to be healing and taking care of each other.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so you had me thinking back to when, even over time, and how, women's roles, a long time ago, and what the roles were. And I know it varies from tribe to tribe. But the important, in a lot of tribes, women held very important roles within our tribes. And how, that narrative has kind of changed over the years because of colonialism and that white male perspective on our tribes. Like, they didn't understand that, they couldn't get that women, were decision makers, and held leadership roles within our tribes. And how I feel like we're kind of getting, not kind of, I guess that we are getting back to that, like, and having more women tribal leaders, and more women, indigenous women, like at the national level, within politics. And it's exciting to see. I went to go get my nails done, and I was waiting. And so I can't even remember what magazine it was, but like, I happened to see some people say Auntie Deb, Deb Holland. It was right on the front page, and so I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. It was a mainstream media magazine. And so I immediately flipped through it, and I found that article, and I started reading it, and I love it. Like, I love seeing, and then we've also got women in mainstream media, like, Lily Gladstone. I love to see all of her success, and like, you these women that are paving the way for for generations to come, right? And in all of these different areas. And so it's exciting, to see all of that. But I'm afraid I'm going to lose you again because you kind of froze there for a quick minute.
Yeah, it's still unstable. I keep getting this message. Hopefully we can finish before it goes out again. But
Well,
yeah, I'm, and as you're saying that, I think just having those women in those in the media, in the in the spotlight, that just gives hope for our younger generation, and even for me, thinking about Deb Holland and all that she's accomplished, even at her age, because I tell people that I'm 62. I said, I'm going to retire. I'm done. They say, you're not even that old. I said, I feel old. And I said, it's not so much maybe it's not the age. I guess it's just the energy. Sometimes I feel like my energy is wavering. But then when I see someone like Deb Holland, and I think, she's just so strong at it. She's still out there doing it. And so I still have a few years left in me. But one of the things you were talking about that earlier about how we're growing older. My parents died in the early 50s or 60s, and so for me, if I get past that point, I've outlived their age, and so that just encourages me that we are going to be able to live longer, and because of maybe we're overcoming some of this historical trauma that has affected our physical being. And so I'm encouraged, maybe my children will live longer, and so they'll have that ability to do more with our lives.
right. Yep. I know that. Yeah. My grandpa made it to like his early 70s. And that's about how old my mom is now. And so, yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I don't think you're going to go anywhere soon. I think you got, you've got a lot of wisdom to share, and you've seen a lot, experienced a lot, in terms of Indian child welfare, through the years. And, and again, I think about that, and, because I've been around and doing this work for a while too. It's like been about 17 years. So I'm not quite at like 30, but even in 17 years, how much have changed, and I remember conversations even about data and how there was a lack of data and we had no data. And now, we're on a national level talking about, AFGARs and changes to AFGARs to increase ICWA data collection,
Yes.
improve ICWA data
Compliance.
collection. And conversations like for some people that's like, who cares? But
Yeah. Yeah, but those of us that have been in the trenches, we understand, why it's so important, and one of the things we did training was it last week? And we spent a whole morning talking about the why of ICWA. I think people don't recognize that it's a law. Sure, it's a law, but why did it come about? And so that's going to help us. Maybe the state will recognize why it's so important that they should be in compliant. And, not because it's a law, because it's about our children, it's about our families. We need to do more for them, especially in active efforts. I hear the state say, that's just more work. I say, you should be doing more work for all your families, not just for our Indian children.
Yep. Yep. Well, I think we're getting close to the end of our time, and I just, always enjoy visiting with you and, hearing about, all that you have to share. And so I want to wish you, a happy Women's History Month and a National Social Work Month. And thank you for all that you've done in Indian country. Your work does not go unnoticed. And I hope to see you at NICWA.
Yes, I'll see you there, and Yakoke for giving me this time. So that's to say I'll see you again, because of course there's no goodbye. We'll see each other. And
Right.
so,
Yes. Don't
Shkiza
stop.
Lashki.
Don't stop. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for watching. If you have any questions or would like to know more about NICWIC, please visit our website at www.nicwic.org.